In my last video where I introduced this concept of corporate brain rot and how God just kind of gave me this divine message in my spirit just to put a term to what I had been experiencing in my corporate leadership career that I'm no longer in, and just the concept around how you can still be performing and leading and executing and succeeding, but not really questioning your life anymore. And I didn't become I didn't only just become aware of this, I came up with a way that I was never going to go back to that type of mindset, that kind of thinking, that type of being ingrained into that. And like I said in the last video, I also want to make sure that I'm saying this up front, that this isn't about corporate bashing or about leaving your job per se. I left my corporate leadership career. I took some extended time off to get clear, to heal. And now I'm back in corporate America, navigating a traditional 9 to 5. But the difference is I did not come back into corporate America the same way that I left. And that's what I want to talk about in today's video, really about how I just healed myself, stepped away from, shifted, whatever you want to call it, out of that mindset or that mentality or that movement of corporate brain rot. And I knew that I just had to show up differently in my life, like not just in my work, but in my life all around. And this was not something that just happened overnight. I also want to make that very clear. I had to change how I moved, and I had to be very intentional about it. But in today's video, I'm going to go through the steps. I have them written down here. I'm going to go through the steps. I'm sure I'll turn this into a framework at some point with a name that can be easily remembered. But there were very intentional steps that I took to shift out of that corporate brain rot thinking and be able to navigate that I'm back in corporate America. So the first thing, I had to become uniquely different. And the reason why I'm saying uniquely different is because I knew I had to be different from the person that I was in my corporate leadership career when I came back into corporate America. But I say uniquely because it had to fit me. It had to fit what I wanted, what I desired, how I wanted to show up in my life and my work. It wasn't about just following someone else's frameworks or strategies, but it was about really getting clear on what I wanted, how I wanted to work, how I wanted to live. And of course, we know, if you're watching this video, I'm sure you're, tapped into personal development. You probably have your favorite teachers, your favorite coaches, your favorite podcasts. And while we can always take bits and pieces from here and there to apply to our lives, and I did a little bit of that, but it wasn't about just trying to copy and paste this coach's strategy or this podcaster's framework into my life. I just had to get super clear and again, become uniquely different. And what that looked like for me was just getting, super clear on how I wanted to work and live and how I wanted to feel in my life and how I work. The next step I did was I had to become quietly bold. And I say quietly because this wasn't something that I had to go telling everybody about, go shouting from the mountaintops. Oh, girl, when I go back to corporate, I'm not doing this, I'm not doing that. Like, I didn't need to do all that. I didn't need to explain to anyone how I was going to reintegrate back into corporate America. I had to get internally bold inside myself and get clear on what I wanted, what I didn't want, what I was going to be available for, what I wasn't going to be available for. And I'll even say, Because if you've been watching any of my videos on this 100-day journey, if you haven't, I've listed the playlist down in the description box. But in my corporate leadership career, like I was just always available. Like the lines between work and home just were so extremely blurred. There was no like stopping time. I woke up working, I went to bed working. Like it was just a lot. So when I made the decision, okay, I've taken this time off, which was 10 months, almost a year, I got really clear on what I wanted my life and work to look like when I got back in corporate America, even to the point of the role that I went into after my sabbatical. I had multiple interviews with some of my dream companies, roles that I thought were, aligned with how I wanted to use my skills and the way I wanted to make an impact. But for the role that I ultimately went into after my career burnout, I even shared with the hiring manager like a little bit about my burnout journey and where I was in this season of my life. Now, of course, I didn't tell her everything. I didn't tell her like the deep, dark secrets, like the nitty gritty. Of course, I didn't share that with her, but I shared enough with her so she could understand how I was going to be moving. And that for me was a bold move. That was very bold because I had not heard or saw like just someone being that candid or giving themselves the permission to be candid. But that's something that I had to internally do. I had to quietly become bold, and me just articulating that to her in the interview, that was bold, and she received it very, very well. I ultimately ended up getting the role, and the rest was history. But that's something that I had to do to get out of that. Not just to get out of it, but to not go back to that corporate brain rot mentality. The next thing I had to do was become very strategic. And in my corporate leadership career, of course, strategy was a big part of the work, but I never really incorporated strategy into my life or my lifestyle. It kind of was something that you just used as a tool or a mechanism for the work that you did. But I became very strategic in my life. And like I said before, what that looked like for me with being strategic is when I was ready to go back into corporate America, I got super clear on the type of work that I wanted to do, how I wanted to use my skills, how I wanted to use my education, the way I wanted to make an impact, the environment that I wanted to be in, the type of leader that I wanted to report to, the team members or the colleagues that I would work with. And when I got clear on all of those things, I made decisions moving from that clarity, moving from that strategic standpoint, because I just felt like, again, you keep doing the same things, you'll keep getting the same results. So I knew I would have to move differently, not to go back into that mindset of just autopilot and just moving through life with what other people said I should do or we should do. I just had to become extremely strategic. I wanted more ease in my life. I wanted to be in environments. And again, when I use the word ease, I'm not saying easy, like with no effort. I'm saying I wanted to be in spaces where everything didn't feel forceful and hard and you have to push through all the time. I wanted to be in spaces where I was able to move and flow and not force. The next thing I did was I started moving with more intention and alignment, and not just doing things because I could do it, but really asking, is this in alignment with how I want to live my life? Is this in alignment with how I want to make impact? Is this in alignment with how I want to work? And just that was a constant thought. It still is to today, like a constant thought on every move that I make, every project that I take on, every client that I work with, every project that I do, even in my 9 to 5. And I continue the last thing, how I stay out of corporate brain rot is I continuously take inventory over my life. And this is the key part right here. I continue to ask myself regularly, is this aligned for the way I want to work and live? Because again, I'm super clear on that now. I'm super clear. And instead of ignoring that like I used to do in the past, I respond to it. I'll be extremely honest with you. My 9 to 5 that I'm in, when I came into it, extremely aligned, just like everything checked the box. And I mean everything. But things change. Business needs change. Leadership changes. Things change. And the role is no longer in alignment, but I'm already taking very strategic aligned steps to pivot outside of it. And that's something that I continuously do, even in my business, like continuing to take inventory over my life, asking, is this still driving me forward to the way I want to work and live? And when it doesn't, respond to it. Don't ignore it, because that takes you back into that not questioning anything, just going with the flow, just moving, just being on autopilot. And that is the way that I stay out of that corporate brain rot mentality. Another thing that I started doing, because ultimately, I want to be in a role where I'm self-employed full-time, a full-time entrepreneur, or even if I am working in corporate, it'll be as a consultant. So again, I'm still like a contractor. That's ultimately the vision that I see for myself. So what I did also when I came back into corporate America, I didn't have the language for it 3 years ago, but now what I was doing and what I continue to do is I use my corporate 9 to 5 as a strategic asset. That's what I look at that as. I look at that as, this is my job, not my identity. And how is this job in this season moving me forward to the life in the work that I desire? So again, just using some real-time examples, how I started using my 9 to 5 as this strategic asset is like using my corporate benefits to work on my life, my business, the things I wanted to do. So I use my time, my benefits, my PTO, my income. So for example, I'm in a season now because I'm working a 9 to 5, I'm building a business, I'm just doing many things, and I'm rebuilding my finances. So I don't have the finances to travel in the way that I desire to travel, but I still take my PTO. And you know what I use my PTO for? To work in my business, to work on my business. So I'm using that corporate benefit as an asset to build my desires, my business, my dream with my pay. I make a nice salary, not what I used to make when I was in my corporate leadership role, but I make a nice salary. I used that salary last year to fund my book project, which is writing a book and doing it well and hiring the help and support for it to be a solid product is not cheap. So I use, again, the income from my job to fund my entire book project. Again, these things in this job is supporting the life that I want to live and the way that I want to work for the future. Again, I'm not looking at, when I came back into corporate America, those days were gone of me like having what I do be tied into my identity. Like, girl, no, that job is a strategic asset. How can this job fund, or how can I use this job or the benefits from this job to move the things that I desire in my life forward? And again, still why I do very well in my corporate career. So again, this isn't about like being lazy or, I don't know, slacking or whatever you want to call it. excel in my corporate 9 to 5. Like, it's, I do well, but in my mind, in the way that I want to live and work, I'm using that. That's not my end all be all. That 9 to 5 isn't my end all be all. I'm using that as a strategic asset to move myself forward. My job isn't who I am. It's something that I'm using to move my life forward in the way that I desire. And so for me, getting out of that mindset of corporate brain rot isn't about like quitting your job or bashing corporate or stepping away. For me, it's about not losing yourself while you're navigating in these corporate spaces, in your job, in your career, while you're succeeding, while you're climbing the ladder. You're not losing yourself in those systems and in that construct. You're continuing to check in with yourself. You're continuing to take inventory of your life, to continue to evaluate, does this still work for me? Is this still leading me to the direction in the way I want to live and work? Is this still in alignment with how I want to live my life? And if it isn't, taking that as data, as evidence, not ignoring it, and coming up with a strategy or a game plan to pivot, move forward, or whatever you need to do to not let the corporate brain rot sink back in. And those are the shifts that I made. And that I followed them. I followed it just like that. And like I said, after I created that video a few days ago on what corporate brain rot is, I wanted to just really talk about how I was able to get out of that thinking and not go back to that thinking while still doing well in corporate America, but I'm building something for myself that lives outside of that. And you may not want to be an entrepreneur or self-employed, but it still is very helpful to understand the corporate brain rot mentality and to continue to check in with yourself regularly to just see if where you're at, how you're moving, what you're doing, the role you're in, all of those things, if they still work for you, if they are still moving you forward in the way that you desire to work and live. So again, that's the real shift, and not just changing your situation, but changing how you move through life, because that's what keeps you from coming back. That's what keeps you from getting sucked back into that corporate mentality, that corporate brain rot. Because like I said before in the last video, when you are doing well and when you are succeeding and when you are moving the business forward and when you are leading and when you are just, the capable, responsible person that you are, girl, ain't nobody gonna check in on you. Nope. Nobody is. So that's why you have to do it for yourself, because you have to live this life. I have to live this life. That's why I'm just super, don't play with me about this life that I'm living. I want a certain type of life, and it's more for me about the way that I feel in my body with the type of work and the type of life that I'm living. That's my compass and that alignment and that intention. And you have to be super focused and clear on that, because nobody else will do it for you. So let me know in the comments if any of this resonated with you. If you have any questions, let me know down in the comment. But I do have a question for you. What's one way you know that you have to start moving differently? Let me know down in the comments. What's one thing you know you need to do to start living differently, to not go back to a version of yourself that you don't want to go back to? Give this video a like. drop me some comments down below. I'm Erica Prevell, and I share daily conversations helping ambitious women rework their relationship with ambition, capacity, rest, and creativity. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye.